So I'm the founder of Dynamon, and it's a data analytics company that helps the transport industry. So big logistics companies such as supermarkets, retailers, Amazon, it helps them reduce their costs and be more efficient, and also helps them reduce their CO2 emissions. Road transport is probably one of the most important infrastructure parts of the industry, the logistics industry in the world. Everything that you see that's man-made has been put on a truck and moved. So the efficiency of that industry is extremely important to driving down cost and improving the environmental impact of retail. Why does it need a data analytics company to help them improve procurement? Well, I did my PhD in engineering, and I saw an industry which didn't appear on the outside to be very efficient. So I went to some logistics companies and asked them, so what do you spend on fuel? And what they told me was extremely surprising. I was told that company that I met that day, that wasn't a very large logistics company, I'd never heard of them, spent £150,000 a day on fuel. And one of our customers that we're working with today, they spend over £400,000 a day on fuel. It's extremely important that these companies operate efficiently to reduce those costs. And every pound you spend on fuel, that's kilograms of CO2 emitted into the environment. So I was determined to make a company to help them reduce their costs. So I've got an undergraduate degree from the University of Southampton. I'm very lucky to have gone to the university. And I originally came to Southampton University because I'm from the northeast of Scotland. I originally came here because I wanted to be a professional sailor. And as I went through my degree course, I started to realize I really enjoyed the engineering side of things. And I became more interested in the engineering than the sailing side of things. As I went through my degree course, I pretty much decided later on during my master's that I wanted to do a PhD. And I was lucky enough to have a professor that was hosting PhDs for UK sport innovation. So we have Olympic athletes coming to the university, and this still happens today actually, and these PhDs are still available. And they use our engineers at the university to understand how they can improve their performance to increase their likelihood of winning Olympic medals. And I applied to one of these programs, and I was successful and got taken on. And our job was to work with a whole range of different sports and athletes to help them really understand their performance, help them measure performance, and then make recommendations of how they can improve the choice of the equipment that they're wearing, whether it's athlete clothing, bikes, sleds if they're in winter sports. We work with British Skeleton, how their sled was designed to help them improve performance and go faster. And it was simply just giving them the information they needed to make decisions more effectively. And a big part of that process I learned was that the engineering challenge was massive, but what was more important, and also a massive challenge, was communicating the technical details of what we were doing to a group of people that weren't technical. They had to then adopt these recommendations and take them on and believe that they were going to work. And it was important that we developed methods of communicating to these people that they would then adopt these improvements. And it worked. Over the last 3 Olympic cycles, perhaps 4 actually, this program has been in place, and the UK has been doing really well. Team GB has been doing really well as a result of it. So when I was doing that program, I was very much aware of the work that we were doing in the Olympic arena could be taken and utilized in another industry, basically. So the logistics industry seemed like the most appropriate place that this could be used. Lots of vehicles moving around, and it's just like an athlete. You know, they've got aerodynamic drag, they've got weight. How do we make this truck go from A to B as efficiently as possible? And I wasn't specifically interested in the trucks themselves. I was more interested in the magnitude of this problem. We've got 450,000 heavy goods vehicles in the UK, 60 billion litres of fuel is consumed, and if I could have some impact on that, that would be amazing, and that would make me feel very satisfied. And so I had the idea for Dynamon. So that was what led me to start Dynamon. I'll just give you a little bit of background of what Dynamon is right now before I go on to talk about the journey from idea to executing on that idea. So we're a data analytics company. We help big logistics companies make decisions based on data. We've developed the most sophisticated data analytics service in the industry, and we are processing, so for the past week, for example, our data analytics processed over 40 million miles of vehicle data to answer a question for one of our customers, which we'll be delivering to them tomorrow. A question which could save them many millions of pounds per year over the next few years. And 40 million miles is what their vehicles, what a subset of their vehicles have done in the last 9 months. So that's to the moon and back 50 times for a small group of vehicles in the UK. That's how far these trucks are driving. To answer that question, our data analytics has performed over 82 billion iterations on all the potential things that they could do to their vehicles. And what it does is it spits out, do this, and you'll save this much fuel. So therefore, they are now empowered with the information we're providing them to make better decisions. And there's a lot of well-designed engineering solutions in the world of logistics and in the world outside logistics. But it requires the information for these companies to make the right decision to buy these things, to use these things. And if you're in a cutthroat business where cost is really crucial, they need to know very clearly why they should be spending the money on something. Otherwise, they will just try to spend less money. In the logistics industry, the operating costs are 4 times the cost of buying a vehicle, for example, and 75% of your operating costs go into fuel. But because the industry and the people working in the industry aren't PhDs in engineering, they're not data analytics experts, without the help, they're not really able to make those procurement decisions with real data. And so they end up focusing on the very small thing that they can change, which is spending less money on their vehicles and simplifying that, when actually the real big challenge is getting the operating costs down. So that's what the value we bring to the industry, and we're working with enormous logistics companies and providing real value, real millions of pounds worth of value. So that's what we are. So the journey from the idea of I could see the opportunity through the magnitude of it to where I am today, where we're actually impacting that industry, I'm going to share that with you. So towards the end of my PhD, I was busy writing up. I had this idea, and I spoke to my colleagues about it, and pretty much everyone agreed with me that it was something that made sense. I thought that we could help these companies be more efficient. What if a truck was more aerodynamic? What if a truck was a ton lighter, for example, by making it from different materials? They all make sense theoretically. So it was about going out into the world and finding whether or not I thought the logistics industry would adopt this approach. Luckily, the university had a program in place where I could apply for a Dragon's Den competition. And this was way before Future Worlds existed, which is amazing now that this exists. I won £3,000 in a Dragon's Den competition. I went to Aberdeen to pitch my idea, and I got my £3,000. But crucially, I also received a mentor. So the money was useful. It enabled me to do some things, to buy some equipment and buy a computer that I could then do my analysis on, start developing the code. But it gave me a mentor, and that mentor was really important. It was someone that I could speak to, and it was a woman who's a professor at Cambridge University and a professor at Warwick. And I could speak to her and ask her, bounce my ideas off her, and she would give me some really strict, stern advice. She would tell me when an idea was bad and when she thought perhaps the idea was worth pursuing. And she also introduced me to that first logistics company that I spoke to who had a fuel bill of £150,000. So that was a really important step, because that was the first step where I had now the support, I had the introductions, I'd kind of made some promises, and now the ball was rolling. I had to start sort of producing some answers. That led me to then apply for another program that was available at this university, and it was called the EPSRC Doctoral Prize. So if you're doing a PhD, that's available to you afterwards. And it was an entire year of me being paid to basically do what I wanted to do. And because I was motivated to start my own business, I worked for a year developing more code, meeting more companies. I did a lot of traveling. And I also worked with my mentor. And the whole idea just started to develop. And that then led on to, well, this is serious now. I've worked on this for over a year. I'm going to apply for some proper funding to try and get this thing up and running. I didn't know anything about investment, but there was funding available. So I applied to the Royal Academy of Engineering, and they have a program called the Enterprise Fellowship Program. There's also many other programs that the Royal Academy of Engineering offer, and other institutions as well, that help people with ideas. They don't need to be qualified in any particular way. So you don't need to have a PhD to apply for the Royal Academy of Engineering fellowship anymore. You did when I was doing it. And I was really lucky to get that. That was a very competitive program. And I think if I hadn't have done my year prior to that, honing down my idea, working with my mentor, I probably wouldn't have made it onto this quite prestigious program. And that gave me another year of time to spend developing this, but it also gave me a lot of money. It came with a lot of money, which enabled me to employ people. And then I could employ some software developers, and I could pay for other consulting projects which I needed doing to develop our analytics. Because I'm an engineer, I can code, but I'm a bit of a generalist, really. I'm not an expert. I needed to work with people that were experts. And so I worked with someone from computer science, and in his spare time, he developed code for me. I paid him on a consultancy basis. It worked really well, and that was funded through the Royal Academy of Engineering. What the Royal Academy of Engineering also provided was extremely good mentorship. So I had a mentor which I had to meet once a month, and every month I also had to go to training. And it was an absolute pleasure to meet with my mentor, and it was an absolute pleasure to do the training. We would get business model training. We would get how to raise funding training. We would go to networking events in London where we would meet directors from various large organizations, some directors that started Hewlett-Packard, some directors that would start ARM, who is a very important chip company that make all the chips, that design all the chips that go into our phones. They were all came down to the Royal Academy of Engineering and would meet us and talk to us. And that's really important from a development perspective, because we're all of us here, we're at a university, we're very focused on our narrow area of expertise, and I had a very narrow, deep understanding of what I wanted to do. I didn't know how to start a business. So speaking to these, some people were technical experts themselves, but they'd then gone into business, and they seemed to be less concerned all the time about the technology and more concerned about the business model and more concerned about the customer. And that's something that, for me, was perhaps a bit of a challenge. I thought the technology will sell itself. The technology is the thing that's going to solve the problem, and the customers will just come, and they'll just use and the business model's fine. They'll just pay us, and therefore we'll have a business. And that's one of the biggest things I've learned over the years. My technical understanding has probably improved a bit, but my business understanding on how to actually sell something, how to actually price something, and how to explain to a customer the benefit of what you can bring to them, that is a really challenging thing for an engineer to do when they're so focused on the concept that the technology is the solution, not the business model, not the pricing, anything like that. So that was a real learning curve for me, which I benefited from being at the Royal Academy of Engineering. What I also did during that period as well, because I, as a PhD student, and therefore then what you would call a postdoc, I actually had a desk in the university, I had an office. Sorry, my phone's ringing. I actually took myself out of that environment, out of that academic environment, and I went to the science park. So the university owns an entire business park north of Southampton. And I put myself there, took myself out of the academic environment. I wanted to surround myself with more business-minded people, and less of, I could see the technology was probably not going to be the problem. It was about how do we get this thing, how do I build a company successfully? And that was a real benefit for me. Future Worlds didn't exist at the time. If Future Worlds had existed then, I probably would have taken myself from my office on campus down to Future Worlds, but that is now available for you, which is a real benefit. But I did what's called the Catalyst program on the Science Park, run by the University of Southampton Science Park, where I was there for about 6 months, and I was there with other people like me trying to start their own companies. We were in a room together asking each other all the stupid questions about what payroll system to use, how do I pay my taxes, what lawyer have you used, all this kind of basic stuff that an engineer would never learn, someone with a PhD would never learn, but really useful day-to-day things that you need to do to just run a business. There's a lot of administration involved in running a business. If you have a name, you need to trademark that name. You need to have a website. You need to be registered on Companies House. All this stuff is kind of annoying, but it needs to be done. And that is it's crucial in part to run a business by doing that. So the Catalyst was a very good program for me, day-to-day, sitting next to people in Southampton, starting their own companies. And luckily as well, in the Catalyst program, I was also sat next to a guy who'd already started a company. He was probably, I don't know his age exactly, but he was quite a lot older than me. And I was just leeching information off this person, trying to learn everything. And that was a real benefit to knowing what to do. Because as a founder who founds a company when they're 24, you literally don't know anything about how to run a company. You're learning as you go along. So you can learn by making mistakes and realizing that's not the thing to do, and then potentially making it going well and doing it right. Or you can learn by asking people questions. And it's really important, I felt, to just be next to people that knew what they were doing, or be surrounded by people who were all trying to work it out together. So I think that's something that Future Wells will also develop, which is really important. But there are lots of programs available, which I tried to be part of to do that. So the Enterprise Fellowship went very well. I was on it for over a year. I had funding, I had a product, I had customers. I now needed to go from the University of Southampton into the real world. I needed to not be employed by the University of Southampton anymore, which is what I was, which was great, and be employed by my own company, Dynamon. So I had a company. It had some money in the bank, but most of my money actually was in the university through the grant funding I'd got. And technically speaking, I was an employee of the university. So everything I do as an employee of the university is owned by the university. So I can't just go and make money from that. That's against my contract. They could sue me for it. So then I had to strike a deal with the university. And how do you strike a deal with this university? Who do you speak to? So that in itself was a very big process for me to go through. And it took a very long time, because initially I just wanted to go and take my company and make some money. But then about 6 months later, I also wanted to raise some investment. And my investors needed to know that I was allowed to do this, and the university weren't going to come along in 10 years' time when we were a big, successful company and say, actually, that's ours, you owe us money. So I had to come to a deal with the university, and I worked with the relevant people in, it's generally called technology transfer, transferring the technology from the university into the company. And I said to them, look, this is my idea. There's no patent. It's a service company. It's based on some analytics that I've developed. I had a value that I associated with what my business was probably worth at the time, how much money I'd spent, how much money the university had supported me with. And I said, I think that it's probably worth this money. We had a negotiation. So we agreed what I owed the university to take my company away, but I didn't have that money. It was many tens of thousands of pounds. So the deal that we came to was that if the company is successful, I will pay them that money. And so that success was defined as how much profit we will make or how much revenue we will make at some point in the future within a certain period of time. And I'm allowed to therefore go unrestricted off and run my company. And that's the deal I've got. So the time span the clock is still ticking. If we hit those targets, the university will be owed money from me. But that's okay, because it'll be a successful company. And that was a good deal. That was my first big deal, I guess you could say, was working with the university to get this thing signed off. And it was very challenging, because one of the things that you will learn is that most people aren't very good at negotiation. They would rather just not engage with you. They'd rather not reply to your email than have the actual conversation. And sometimes you've got to force that conversation, whilst at the same time trying not to lose, because they could put down some terms which you just can't agree to. And so, yeah, the negotiating side of things, that was an interesting process. So when I'd spun the company out, I had now my own business. I had some money in the bank from some consulting work that we'd done. We did a big project with a bus company in Newcastle. They wanted to know whether or not they should use the expensive diesel or the cheap diesel, and we concluded that they should just use the cheap diesel, but in that case it was an interesting question. And the fuel companies were very interested in our answer, but it was a simple question of, does the more expensive diesel really do anything to your engine? It does do something, but unfortunately it wasn't worth the price at the time. So that was very useful for them as a company. And so I had money from that project in Dynamon, which I could pay my pay myself, or just get by. Let's face it, I wasn't paying myself much, whilst I raised funding. So then I had to, in order to then execute my vision of creating a company that would advise and provide data analytics for big logistics companies, I needed a team, I needed data analytics experts, I needed software developers, I needed commercial people to develop this. So I went to the market, the angel investment market, to raise funding to go out and execute on this plan. And that was an extremely long and challenging process as well, which I didn't know if it was ever going to be completed. You're literally going out and asking relatively normal people with a lot of money, but not millionaires probably, for them to support you. And some people would support you with a bit of money, and then you would take that bit of money and say, I've got already this much pledged, do you want to support me as well? And then eventually you would build up a reasonably large amount of money. And we raised £150,000 on that first fundraise. And it's also backed by the government. There is actually some support for these investors from the government so that they get some protection on their investment. So we had £150,000 and I went out and I closed that round. It took probably about 6 months of negotiation and finding investors. And I had that money in the bank, and I also had a few people that were willing to join the business at the same time. So on the basis that the money was in the bank and we could employ them and pay their salaries, they would then quit their jobs and come and join me. So when the money came through, these people quit their jobs and they came in and joined me, and I felt this incredible sense of responsibility. I wasn't just paying myself, I had to pay these people at the end of every month. I'm willing to not get paid because it's my passion, but these people are, whilst they are joining a startup and they're passionate about being in a startup, they expect to be paid. So that was when it got real. And then the process was then leading this team to developing our product, and that process has been going for about 2 years now, pretty much 2 years exactly. We've grown the team ever so slightly over the years, but we've tried to keep it relatively lean. We have the people that we need, and I've chosen to work with passionate, generally good, generalist people that are have broad set of skills and can roll up their sleeves and do whatever it needs doing at the time. And that's really important when you haven't got a big team. You need people that will do video editing, photo editing, at the same time as developing analytics. So we've got a PhD in physics from University of Exeter, who's our head of analytics, that also seems to be, without him realizing, is also a very good video editor because he had to make a video one day. Our head of software, who comes from a critical data background, also turns out is very good at building stands for trade shows. And we had a very beautiful stand at a trade show. So all these, it's good working with these general people. You trust them. You know that whatever needs doing, they'll do it. They're not going to be afraid of trying stuff they're not good at. And that's really important when building the team. So we've developed our product, and then we've spent the last 12 months we've got now a dedicated analytics product. It's called Tire Analytics. And we work with logistics companies now. One of the things that they enjoy thinking about buying is tires. If you run a logistics company, you've got a massive fuel bill. You haven't really got much choice on what fuel you put in it, but you've also got a massive tire bill. Do I buy all the big brands? Michelin, Continental, Pirelli, Bridgestone. They've all got their favorites, and we help them make those massive purchasing decisions. If you're buying 20,000 tires a year, you've got to do it with some level of intelligence. You can't just buy the ones that you like, and so that we're helping companies now buy these products. These technical products that have been designed by experts back in head office in France or in Germany. We're helping them buy the correct tire for their vehicle, and it's having millions of pounds worth of impact on their operating costs. So that's been a real success in going from very broad, generally data analytics, down to very narrow, tire analytics. I never thought that I would have a product and it would be called Tire Analytics, but I do. And that being able to follow the market and create something that genuinely helps a customer is what you learn that you have to do to run your company. And then the money we make from that, we can feed into doing other things and expanding out wider into the the logistics industry and developing our product to help in other areas. So getting customers is one of, I'll finish on the getting customers and then and the reality of it. Getting customers is extremely challenging. Running a company, like I say, you need to pay your staff, and that money needs to be there. You've got generally 2 ways of getting money as a startup. You've got investment, 3 ways. You've got investment, you can get grant funding, and you've got customers. You should be focusing on getting money for your customers, because the other 2 will run out eventually. You can't keep raising funding as a startup. You have to get revenue from customers. If you've got reliable revenue from customers, you can get the other funding, generally speaking. And that's extremely challenging, because if you're trying to sell to large public companies, they will look at you as a small company, and are you reliable? Are you going to deliver on your promises? And so that will always be the challenge for a startup, because you're kind of making a promise and then having to develop the solution to deliver on it. But if you can do that, then the rewards are enormous. You are a small company working with very large players. Your reputation will just skyrocket overnight, and next minute you will have cash in the bank to expand. And that, for me, was that's the dream. You know, was for a small, compact, lean company to have a huge impact. That's what makes it very fun for me. I'm not sure if we became a very large company, I'd enjoy it as much, and I'd probably want to start another small company. And that's the real enjoyment, is having that huge impact. Money is not really the reason I do it. Yeah, whilst it would be great, it's not the motivating factor, because actually, in reality, I think if you're going to go on this journey, the reality is that it's not guaranteed. So you have to be prepared to have not a lot of money, perhaps, before you actually have a lot of money. So you need to be more comfortable with actually having less money than it's not going to make you rich guaranteed. So you need to be comfortable with not having a lot of money, based on the reward being, I love my job. I love the fact that this small team of people, which I have put together and are really dedicated, are having an enormous impact in the world. And I think that's what a startup should aim to do. And if you get all those things right, the money should come, and you should be able to then have more security and do the more luxurious developments that you've always wanted to do in your company. That's me, done. Thank you, guys. The answer is yes. I think actually it's important to have days off. When something needs doing and there's a deadline and it's tomorrow and you have to stay up all night, yep, totally get that. That's what you have to do. But at the same time, it is a long journey. I've been doing this for 6.5 years, and if I hadn't had a holiday, I would have burnt out and probably got completely fed up with it. It's a long and hard journey, and you need to have time off, for sure. Well, so we built what you would call an MVP, a minimum viable product. And I think every company should do that. That's really important. What we have today is an incredibly sophisticated, and it would be expensive to make, solution, which nobody can imagine doing without raising lots of money. But then how would you raise that money in the first place? So we built a minimum viable product which demonstrated that we could collect data from vehicles, we could make predictions based on changing things on the vehicles, and it worked pretty well. It wasn't going to analyze 40 million miles of vehicle data. It wasn't going to do 82 billion iterations, but it demonstrated the vision which our investors could see, our customers could see, and then you iterate on that, and it eventually gets better. It is a lot harder to be a sole founder, I'm told. I only know one thing. And I think that if you've got the opportunity to have a co-founder, I think that having a co-founder is amazing, I imagine. But you've got to find someone that's going to go on this 6.5-year journey with you. And that's going to be hard as well, because it's a long time. They may want to leave and move off somewhere else. They may have this idea that if it doesn't work out in 2 years, I'm giving up, whereas your deadline might be 3 years. So finding a co-founder is really important, but it has to work out. Otherwise, it will just be a problem waiting to happen in the future. Well, they probably will have a huge impact on our business. It depends whether they're going to actually happen. So in terms of cost, the costs of a logistics company will be, you've got, like I said, you've got the cost of buying the vehicle, you've got the cost of operating the vehicle. The cost of fuel is 75% of the operating costs. When they go electric or hydrogen, that cost actually probably won't change hugely, so they'll still need to make intelligent procurement decisions. The driver will, in my opinion, won't be leaving the vehicle anytime soon. They'll still have to do something at the ends of the journeys. So I don't see it being a huge challenge for us, or I don't see it putting us out of business. The operators of these companies, the people that we actually help, who are the managers making the procurement decisions, if they all had PhDs in data analytics and had a big team working for them, they wouldn't need us. But the reality is that won't happen. So I think there'll always be a need for a dedicated, focused data analytics company that can help these people make procurement decisions. I think that the advice is if you really believe that you can do it, you should do it. Yeah. And if you're passionate about it, you'll find it through all the hard times, because there are hard times. It's not a breeze, but you'll enjoy it because you're passionate about it. If you're not passionate about it, but you like the idea of running a company, it's probably not for you. But in addition to that, I think that not everyone should be a founder, because some people are probably very good co-founders, or they would be very good at working for a founder. And actually, if you think that that's you, go for it. Join a startup and work for a startup, because it's so rewarding to be part of a startup and seeing you build something. If you're creative and you enjoy building things, work for a startup.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Angus. Angus will be around.